Good day. This is going to be a recording to discuss the upcoming essay over short stories. I will make sure that we have everything clear, how you're going to approach it, what you need to do in order to upload it. So far you've been doing fine with Turn It In. I just want to make sure that that's still going on. And we want to go over a few details. Just make sure that you understand how to approach this particular essay. By now, of course, I hope that you have gone through and you're having access to the ebook. You can click here, the W.W. Norton, or I also gave you this one. Sometimes they'll ask you to re-register, not re-register, but just to sign in to make sure everything is taken care of. But what you should wind up with once you do access it is the book itself. And the table of contents is found over here, as I pointed out for you earlier. Simply click there, and then you look for what you're trying to find. You can do a search, or if you know exactly what page number, you look for it. Here's The Story of an Hour by Chopin. I went to that particular one just to show you that was the first reading assignment. So you have that one. Hopefully you have also gone through the writing process handouts and details. This one discusses how to write the literary analysis essay. Very quickly, we're going to look at it. There it comes. This is a handout that is done by Bucks County Community College. They gave me permission to use it, so I do. One of the key aspects that you want to make sure that you're paying attention to when you do this, I'm going to zoom this up a little bit for you, that you are evaluating a work of literature for a particular aspect. You're looking at a key detail. The analysis, as it says, of a poem, I deal with different kinds of images. If you're looking at a play, maybe it's a subplot, story, maybe a particular theme. Keep in mind that what you're doing when you're writing a literary analysis is that you're developing an argument. And an argument is simply stating a position in regard to a particular topic. You also need to keep in mind that this is a formal writing. It is not a conversation or a discussion in the sense of as you may have it in the classroom. So instead you must follow the MLA guidelines for formal writing. Standard written English will be used. You will avoid contractions. You will avoid slang expressions unless you are quoting from the particular work that you're using. Those are not used. References to you, or the expressions like I think, I believe, I feel, or I understand. The use of those pronouns are unnecessary. You're not engaged in a conversation with the reader, so don't try to tell the reader you will see this, or when you read the story you will understand. No, don't talk to the reader. Present your points in a formal manner. As it says here, stick with great determination to the specific point of development. That means you have to have a central idea, a thesis. You want to develop several paragraphs, so you're going to follow proper MLA format guidelines. You will double space the essay. You will tab over for every paragraph. You're going to focus on the particular topic. You have a choice of topics. We'll look at those in just a moment. You're going to narrow that topic to a stance, a central statement, thesis, and then you're going to pull specific details from the story to serve as the evidence that you need to help validate your idea. It needs to be an organized writing from start to finish. So keep all those in mind. This particular handout goes on and shows you about the thesis statement, what one should sound like, how it can be used. Then it talked about an introduction, how you need to set up your essay. They give you examples here. For instance, one of these is about John Updike's short story A&P, which you were asked to read. Then it goes into how to develop the body, the idea about paragraphs, topic sentences, key points. And again, here's one about A&P that hopefully you've read through, where it's focusing upon the description that Sammy offers and how that description helps to present the setting as an important function for the story. As it says here, just as much of a character, the antagonist of the story. So it's just as much the same of the story, A&P, is just as much a character in the story, if you will. And it goes in and talks about how it's presented in this way, being ugly, monotonous, and rigidly regulated, and offers specific quotes and details from the story to provide that. And then your conclusion should not be simply a repetition of the introduction. If your introduction and your conclusion sound almost identical, then you're missing one or the other. The conclusion needs to make the final point. What is the final idea that you're leaving your audience with? And that's how you conclude your essay. And you can see one here. Putting a title on your essay, do not just, if you entitle your essay, which I suggest you do not put Kate Chopin's Story of an Hour or an essay over a story of an hour. No, that's not a title. You need to provide a title that expresses what your approach to the story is going to be. This handout goes on, talks a little bit about the use of textual evidence. You are going to use details from the story, whichever one you choose, in order to support and to explain ideas that you have about the story. This goes in and shows you some details, how to do that, direct quotations, the use of citations and how that's supposed to be done. I'm going to go on down here. I don't think any of you will be using ellipsis, but if you do leave out a little bit, you put an ellipsis. That's a series of periods. Punctuating the direct quotations, how to do so, gives you ideas how to put that. If you'll notice, here's the quote, like a lion, there's the citation, and then the period go here. The period goes outside the quotation marks. Keep that in mind. If you have something that's going to be blocked, that means it's going to take longer than 3 type lines. You tab over. You don't use quotation marks unless it's a conversation, such as in Hills Like White Elephants by Hemingway, where you have quite a bit of conversation, then you would use quotation marks. Otherwise, if you're quoting about the setting of that particular story, Hills Like White Elephants, they have long paragraphs on that, then you do not use quotation marks. You put your period and then you put your citation. So blocks are a little different. When you are discussing the short story, it's going to go inside quotation marks. You don't put it in bold. Sorry about that. They have it in bold and I don't get to touch this. But you do put the title of a short story inside quotation marks. And then it has you a checklist, so keep points for you to look at. And again, this was from Buck County. So hopefully that one you've gone through and looked at. I'll go back here just a moment. Bear with it. It takes a little while for this to pop up. There we go. This talks a little bit about the thesis statement and what it should be. Again, it takes a little while for this to come up. This gives you some ideas of what it should involve and how to approach it. What the thesis needs to be and what it doesn't need to be. And they give some examples of weak thesis as opposed to stronger thesis. For instance, this one, Edgar Allan Poe's work was greatly affected by the current events of his life, covering his family life, his childhood, his career. These events changed the style and subject of his work. First, again, this is a handout from someone else. I don't get to fix it. That's not how you spell Allen. It's A-N. But this thesis is far too broad. Now, if you're going to write me a very lengthy book, 500, 600, 700 pages, you might be able to use this particular idea. Otherwise, you can't, because that covers way too much. Rather, you want to focus on something that's much more functional for you. You want to avoid fact or observations. You want instead to make comments. And Brian Yothers goes on and makes this comment. This is who did this particular handout. And how to approach it, ideas that you look at, what you need to do, and then the best thesis statement. I know you're saying, well, this is just because it's longer. No, it's because it's more to the point and offers an idea that has to be argued. The use of whiteness illustrates the uncertainty about the meaning of life that Ishmael expresses throughout the novel. This gives you a point to look at. You're focusing on just whiteness, one key symbol throughout the novel. You're focusing that symbol as talking about the uncertainty of the meaning of life. And you're focusing upon how Ishmael expresses that idea. So it's much more constrained. It is more restricted. It gives a focus so that this can be developed. And that's what you want to do with a thesis. We'll lower that one again. Go back. So hopefully you've read through these handouts and looked at those. The assignments that you were given were designed to help you create a sense of understanding. The first one, about story of an hour, asks you to look at a specific part of the story. First question says the last 5 paragraphs. Those last 5 paragraphs, I'm going to go to the story now, pick up with Louise's response. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She's talking about making yourself ill, so you then pick up here, and yes, that counts as a paragraph. So you have these 5 paragraphs. So this is what you're looking at. And asks you to discuss the sense of irony. So it asks you to look at a particular part of the story and a particular feature that's used. So I was trying to get you to have that focus there. The second question of that assignment asks you to look at how a character is used. The character of Richards, who's named here, and he's also at the beginning. And those are the only 2 places that for really a relatively short story, Richard's name only appears 3 times, I think, total. Very limited. For the bulk of the story, Richards is not involved. So that particular question, though, asks you to look at how is this fairly minor character, though, important? Why did she include him at all? The idea here is, if you go back and look at how she phrases it, we see that it says Richards was there too, near her, the one who had been in the newspaper office. And then you look at this phrasing here. He had only taken the time. He had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend. Think about how this phrase, had only taken the time, had hastened. That seems to give an idea of an individual who was in a rush, who really had not done everything he could have to determine the truth. And as such, when he makes this motion to screen Brentley from the view of his wife and being too late, think of the irony here. He was too late. No, he'd been too early. He had only taken the time. He had hastened. If he had taken better time, if he had been a little more careful, remember it says less tender, less careful friend. Well, if he had been more careful in trying to find out about the accident, he would not have been so early. And as such, now he's too late. And so you have a sense of irony here about Richards. And that's really an important aspect. When he jumps in front of Brentley, you can almost hear it in the colloquial expression of, as he does so, he is saying, "My bad," because he's made a mistake. He had not taken time. He had only taken the time to send a second telegram. He had hastened. He had not been the careful, tender friend he was supposed to be. And as such, now he's having to cover up his own mistake. So you have a great deal of irony taking place just within the character of Richards. And also that how he's used to emphasize this idea of everything being precipitous, everything being in a rush, everything being too soon. So that literally Louise's enjoyment, her determination that she's going to now lead the life for herself, that she's now going to be able to enjoy her life. Well, that's too soon. This anticipation of a better life is too soon, just as everything else is too soon. So it's a key aspect in the story that you want to look at. And that's why I had you answer these questions. And then the third question asks you to form an opinion that you can validate by what the story had given you. And when you write those views, don't use "I think" or "I believe" or "it's my opinion." Any comment you make in your writing will be accepted as your own unless it's cited. So it should be your own view. We don't need to be told this is my opinion, or in my opinion, or I think, or I believe. We know these are your thoughts. You don't have to tell us that. So avoid those kind of expressions. They are wasteful. They take up words that are not needed. So you need to avoid those kind of expressions. If I ask you to take a perspective on the story, in the sense of, is it a loveless marriage or not? Given what the story provides. You have to look at the details in the story, such as the expression that Brentley had only looked at her with love. That's what it says in the story. Also in the story, it says she had loved him. That sometimes she had loved him. And she says she had loved him, sometimes. Often she had not. So you get this idea that the feelings were not necessarily mutual in this story. So it asks you to take a stance and support it with details from the story. The second assignment asks you to look at a story, and the way the questions were phrased was trying to get you to make a connection from one part of the story to another part, so that you can see that a key idea is being utilized all the way throughout. From the way the characters speak to each other, from the details that we learn, from this idea about this operation that they're anticipating, to even the idea, and as the third question asks, about the luggage, the labels. And if you look at that particular one, that question, what it said was, in the story, I'm going to go to that story. Let me go back to where it's located. Try and remember which one what page number it was on. Yeah, there it is, 680. I clicked on the wrong section. In this particular story, if you will look at, hopefully will recall, when he takes the luggage over there, it says he looked at the bags against the wall. There were labels on them from all the hotels where they had spent nights. This idea of the labels from all the hotels where they had spent nights. The labels are reflecting this relationship very much so. This is a very key aspect, a very key symbol of the story, because where they had spent nights, not where they had stayed. It doesn't phrase it that way. Where they had spent nights, which gives you this view about this relationship, that they were only together at night, if you will. That this relationship really was a nighttime relationship for the most part. There's that physical aspect that's being emphasized here. And then likewise, what he does with the luggage, he takes them over and put the two heavy bags and carry them around the station to the other tracks. And then coming back, he walked through. Literally, he leaves the bags at the station on the other tracks, carry them to the station to the other tracks, and that's where he would leave them. He literally taking these heavy bags, as they're called, for someone else to deal with. On a train, you have a baggage carrier who, of course, comes and takes the bags. For those of you who have flown, it's very similar. You take your luggage and you give it to somebody to take care of, and then you don't worry about your luggage until you have to get it whenever you arrive. You go find your luggage. Well, he's letting someone else deal with these heavy bags. And these are the bags that are labeled about the nights where they had spent. So the consequence of the nights that they had spent at these hotels, of course, is that she's expecting a baby. That's what the operation is, to deal with this issue. Well, those nights that had consequences, well, he's going to let someone else deal with those bags. Those bags are reminders of the nights because of the labels. He's letting someone else deal with this situation, just as he's going to have someone else deal with this condition she's in. This idea of just letting in the air. He's going to let someone else handle that situation. So the idea that everything is connected from the fact that all they do is look at things and try new drinks. To the everyday, they make it more impossible because they keep putting off. They don't ever talk about it. They don't even name the operation, the situation that they face. They never mention it at all. They are instead trying to just go through their lives looking, trying new drinks, never choosing, making a strong choice, stabilizing, if you will, but moving from one hotel to the next where they spent nights. Not days, not weeks, just nights. So you get this idea of a transitory, moving relationship constantly. And so we see that these expressions are part of this as well. That helps to capture this whole relationship that these two had, Jig and the American. So it becomes really important when you look at these. I try to get you through those questions to be thinking about how different parts of the story are all connecting. And then, of course, the third assignment was asking you to try to put that together about point of view. How the story is being told actually allows us to understand a character, Sammy. What are his traits? What are his conditions? You were asked to write a paragraph or so about that, where you asked to understand what he's trying to tell us in regard to, in the sense of Updike, what he's trying to tell us about this character who literally is relating the story as he sees it from his point of view. That first person point of view being used to reveal for us the key traits of Sammy, the way we would describe him. We know he's 19 because that's told in the story. But this idea that he seems to be fairly immature, fairly judgmental, highly prejudiced, bored. I think one of you wrote about his being bored at his job. We can recognize that. This idea that he's caught up in his own perspective and not understanding any other detail, a little upset with rules and restrictions. Remember in the handout about writing about the literary analysis where they used A and P, and they talked about the setting being rigidly regulated. And we gain that Sammy's not very happy about that rigid regulation. So these are ways that you look at stories. So I try to get you to think about those. I also have for you this about revision from North Carolina. I'll open it up very quickly. And it talks about what revision is, so that when you're writing your essay, you go through the whole process, creating a draft, then going back through and revising that draft. Revising is not just proofreading. Proofreading is a separate step. Yes, it's important to spell your words correctly, use proper punctuation, use proper language choices, all the details that proofreading and editing involve. But revision involves rethinking your ideas. And this is what it goes in and talks about here. It's not just fixing commas and spelling, that's proofreading. And if you want to know about proofreading, you can click on this and that will open up. Revision is a major step of the writing process that you should be going through, that you're going to spend time with and develop. You want to go back through it and analyze what you've done. You want to examine the balance, check, make sure that you have your thesis presented, that you have it supported, that everything is organized, that you've used information, evidence from the story to support your points, and that you provide a sound conclusion where everything is tied together. And raises, I don't want to rewrite my whole paper. Well, maybe you won't have to, but you might. Literally one aspect of the revision process is sometimes you read over what you've done, you've looked at it, you go through careful re-looking, which is what revision means, and you decide that what you've done doesn't work, and you have to start all over again. And that's a key aspect. Talking about sometimes you revise as you go. Yeah, we probably do, but you want to make sure that you go through it fully again. Don't try to stop and start, because that's going to cause problems with your overall essay. And so it goes in and talks about some details here, some key aspects you want to do. And one of the key aspects about revising your essay is to read it through carefully without marking anything, and then go through and check your transitions. That's one of the key points I would think you should start. How did you get from the first paragraph to the second? Do you have a connection? How did you move from your second to your third? Do they fit together? Can you flip paragraphs? Could the fourth paragraph move up to where you have the second paragraph? And if you can do that, then things aren't fitting where they need to fit. Because there should be a sound organization to the essay. That where the fifth paragraph is where the fifth paragraph belongs. It can't go anyplace else in the essay. Where the eighth paragraph is, well, that's because that's where it needs to be. You should not be able to flip paragraphs in and out. If you can, then you don't have a very good organization. You haven't done what you need to do. So you need to go through and really check your transitions and how you match up your points. You want to go through and make sure that you are arguing an idea. A literary analysis is an argument. It's where you take a point, you develop an idea, you support that with evidence from the story, key points, key details, quotes, and you explain how those key details, points, and quotes make your point or fit your idea. So that's what you want to do. So you can go through and look at this aspect here from Chapel Hill. And so that's something I put up there about revision, because you need to make sure that you revise your essay before you submit it. And then I gave you an example essay over short stories. Get this to open up. Here we go. This is a sound essay. It was done 4 years ago. It's not necessarily an outstanding essay, but you'll notice this one didn't give a title, so I overlooked that, which shouldn't have done that. Should have had a title. But names the story, names the author, James Joyce. So the first time you name the author, use the full name. Then it talks about where the focus is. Gabriel Conroy's restlessness. That he used this main character and his restlessness and other details to show us that he is all to combat the struggle he's having to let the past die, that his perception of life and death are literal, and that as he begins to open at the night of the party, he finds himself in an unfamiliar state. And so we sort of have a thesis here offered of this, that he's using the main character to show a key aspect about this view. And then we have our transition. When Gabriel comes in from the cold, he begins with a conversation with Lily, his aunt's maidservant. It could have been a little bit smoother transition, but literally this is when they arrive for the night of the party at his aunt's house. This is when this takes place. You have the quotation here. Again, it doesn't take more than a little over 2 lines. Here's your quotation mark. This uses an ellipsis because it leaves out a few of the lines it doesn't need. And then you have your citation. Joyce, 607, close your parentheses, put your period. And so this is how you do it. Now, a little bit more should have been done with this quote. If you're going to use 2 or 3 lines from a story, you should probably give 4, 5, or 6 lines discussion of that point. If there's enough of it that needs to be presented, you need to discuss it there. You go on and have another quotation here. Now this one keeps this punctuation because the way it's used, but then you put a period here to show that that's where your sentence ends. Goes on, discusses this. Now the next part is a block, and unfortunately this one did not do it right. I didn't correct it. There should be no quotation marks. That's not needed. This should be tabbed over twice, so it should be here. The whole block should be here, and the period should go here after day, and then you have your citation. That's just how MLA has block quotations going. The essay goes on. Here's another block. No quotation marks. Period here. Should be tabbed over twice, not just once, and then your citation. It does a better job of discussing this information. And then it uses another quote. Again, another quote from the story. And it goes on, talks a little bit about key ideas to your conclusion. Gabriel's anxiety and agitation build until he's forced. His reaction is extreme. He finally gets a chance. It does not turn out as he had thought. Nothing truly changes. He and his family finish another annual party. His wife is still his wife. He still has the respect he always had. But his perception, the way he looks at life, his need for control, change. That should be change, not changes. Because you have perception and need. Okay? So you have two different subjects here. And so that should be changed. So you do have a thesis that's presented. Could have been improved a little bit more. Certain details need to be fixed, such as how the citation. But then here's the works cited page. Joyce, comma, James, period, the dead. This is from the 12th edition. Slightly different edition than you're using. But it's basically the same way that you would do it. Author's name, period, title of the story in quotation marks, the Norton Introduction to Literature. In your case, you're using the 13th shorter edition. The year will change and the page numbers change. But you can use the same sort of structure for your works cited page. So that gave you an idea how to approach it. It's a solid essay. It's not necessarily outstanding. It just basically answers the question and does what it's supposed to do. Going back to the modules here. And so as you go through, hopefully some of these handouts, it'll help you some. Then your short story unit, I had some details for you. The analysis of some of the stories, a discussion of it. Had for you some other aspects here to look at. PowerPoint about the birthmark. If you go through that PowerPoint, it's essentially writing an essay. If the prose parts were taken out of the PowerPoint, pictures were eliminated, everything was put together, it would actually be an essay. This is about A Good Man Is Hard to Find by Chopin, and in this particular one, it shows you about thesis and some details. If you looked at it, it's a video, and it literally walks you through a choice of different thesis statements. Literally, there are 6, and provides the first one. The second one is the exact opposite. So literally, there are different approaches you can take to a story, and that's what this does. This is from Dr. Randy Last of Goodwin College, who gives you that idea and presentation. So, let's look at the actual assignment. I have it called up here. In this particular case, the opening tells you literary analysis paper is to focus on a particular aspect, and by using those specific areas, you're going to offer an appreciation and understanding of the work. In this particular case, it goes on and talks about the writing process, having to have a carefully determined thesis, supported paragraph, evidence from the story, and then an analytical discussion of that evidence. You're going to follow MLA format. If you'll look at this handout, it's double-spaced, it's tabbed over for paragraphs. This is your size. The font that you can use, it's Calibri 11. This is how you need to format your essay. So your essay should look like this. Individual paragraphs, tabbed over properly. It should have double spacing all the way throughout. Again, you're not using any outside research. Avoid going to any sources such as ebooks or eNotes or Schmoop or SparkNotes or Cliff Notes or any of those. You don't need those. You're going to offer your argued view of the story with key details, quoted passages from the story serving as your evidence that you would then explain. The example essay we just looked at, that's what it did. It brought in particular quotes and details from the story, and it tried to explain those, try to connect them to the point that was trying to be made. So, you're not going to include any biography of the author. You don't need that. It's not going to work. It's not you're not offering a summary where you just sort of tell me the plot details of the story. I've read them. I know it. You're not doing that. Rather, you are going to analyze and discuss it. That's what this talks about. Put in bold here about plagiarism. Do not go off and copy a paper from someplace else. It doesn't work. The length should be about 800 words or so, 900 words. That's an acceptable length. I believe that in that amount you can do a decent job, but it may be that the approach you're taking will require more, will require stronger development. So again, length is just a suggestion. You may need further, longer development. You are expected to use correct grammar, mechanics all the way throughout. I do expect that to take place. As I mentioned earlier, no contractions for formal writing. No pronouns such as you. Don't address the reader. This is not a conversation. So I give you a choice of topics. The first one concerns A and P, and I ask you to decide what decision that Sammy makes, the decision that he makes when he leaves his job, he quits. Is that an act of honor and integrity, or is it simply a foolish, immature reaction? That's, phrasing in your mind will be a yes-no situation, which one you choose, but you're going to have to argue why this action he takes, his quitting of the job, is one of these or the other. Taking a side, you're going to use details from the story, and you're going to argue that view. You're going to try to convince your readers that your understanding is insightful, that looking closely at the story will allow you to pull out key details, and those details will allow you then to build a line of reason, of explanation that makes sense. So that's the first topic, where you're going to go through the story and you're going to look at the details, which is why I had you do that last assignment, where you can sort of look at Sammy and figure out, well, what is Sammy really like? He's the one telling the story, so he's going to tell it from how he sees everything. But as he does so, what's he telling us about himself? What do we gain about Sammy, and how does that help us to understand about the choice he makes? The next question is about the Faulkner story arose for Emily. And in that particular story, of course, you sort of have you start at one time where Miss Emily's funeral is taking place, and then you flash back throughout the story to different times earlier in her life, and then at the very end, you're back to after the funeral. The townspeople show up at her house, they go inside, and you know what she finds. So the question is, should she be held accountable? Or should we look at Miss Emily and feel sympathy for her because she's a victim of the circumstances? Again, notice that phrasing here, you're convinced the reader that your understanding is insightful. Close reading of the story will, as you offer key details, will explain your line of reasoning. Same phrasing being used each time. So you're going to go through the story and decide, should she be held accountable? Should she be blamed for what she has done? Or is Emily Grierson merely a person who has been a victim of the environment in which she has grown up, the way that she's been treated from the time she was a girl with her father, to the situation that she finds herself in, the restrictions of the South, and all those other details? That's what you have to decide. The next one asks you to look at the birthmark. I gave you the PowerPoint over it. And I ask you to decide who's more responsible. Is it Almer or Georgiana? Almer, who tries to perfect his wife, or Georgiana, who allows herself to be experimented upon, who urges Almer, her husband, to do this experiment? Who should be held responsible in this case? When the blame is assigned, to whom is it assigned? And again, you're going to use details from the story to argue your position. And then I gave you the last one as a chance, last two. I allowed you to look at two stories if you want to compare them. Where if you want to talk about the use of setting in two stories, that's fine. If you want to talk about the use of symbolism and how authors use symbols, that's fine. Whatever. Maybe you want to look at similar themes in stories and how one author develops a theme, how another one does. And then eventually you're going to make a decision as to which story is more successful in the use of whatever it is that you're focusing upon. And then the last one is about social issues. You had a whole chapter, the chapter where you have The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Was all about cultural and historical issues surrounding women. You have the idea of science, technology, if you will, as an issue in the birthmark. You have the idea of the abortion as a social issue and limitations on women in that story by Hemingway, Hills Like White Elephants. So again, a number of these that you can look at. You're going to choose one issue from one story, and you're going to argue that. You have choices I gave, just mentioned a few, mental health, mental illness, religion. If you go back to the Flannery O'Connor stories, religion is really key in those. And so again, you're going to choose one particular issue, and you're going to discuss that, how it's presented, and what point is being made then about that issue as you look at that particular story. So that's what you want to make sure you do. And again, you're going to submit this story. I'm going to go to the actual handout here. Again, you're going to go to click on this, and again, there's the handout, and there's where you load it up. Again, you simply click on this as you've done with the other assignments, and it'll take you to turn it in and ask you to select and then submit. So we should be able to do that one. And then I want to go to one more. Bear with me, it takes a little while for this to come in. I did give you an example essay with markings. This is The Hills Like White Elephants. And what I did, this is how I mark the essays. I do it with Turnitin. Of course, you've seen me put marks as you can go through and look at the markings there. This is one that has some was submitted and as a preview, and of course it's not in Turnitin. I can't use the one with Turnitin because the names always appear. So this is one where I went through and marked some of the details. So you can go through and look at some ideas about what it is I'm paying attention to as I go through the essay. This is one that chose the social issue about abortion. And I go through and I make some points and views. For instance, I strongly believe. You're the one writing the essay. You don't have to tell us that. We assume that taking life from someone that cannot help themselves is cruel and not the guide to happiness. That statement, starting from here down to here, is all that's needed. We don't need the I strongly believe. We know these are the writer's views. What eventually happens is that this person gets a little bit off from the topic, doesn't offer support from the story as much as it needs to, has some issues with a number of other aspects to it. For instance, to abort a child that can be loved one by others or adoption is murder. Well, no, that's not what the law states. And so you have to be accurate. Your perspective, your opinion is not an argument. How you view is your opinion, and that's fine. It's going to make you want to argue the topic, but your actual opinion, and that's an opinionated statement there, is not an argument. Opinions don't count in argument. What proof do you have? As I offered here, saying it's murder, that's an opinion. That's not what the law states. So you have to look at that idea of how you actually have approached it. And again, aborting the child is the same as murder. No, it's not. That's not what the law says. So you have to have your evidence. And again, as it says here, it's murder, selfish, and cruel. Well, that's a value statement. Values are simply how we feel about it. And values alter. Values can change as society changes. What we need is evidence that is logically presented and discussed. This one doesn't draw much from the story. It doesn't offer views that are presented there. It doesn't support it. And so this one lacks quite a bit. So this gives you an idea of how I mark the essay, what I look for, this idea about the details that you need to provide when you are going to argue. So that hopefully gives you an idea of that one that was not very successful. As I said, it was actually a preliminary draft that was sent to me. This one didn't hold up well. So again, you have to be careful with what you're doing. So as you're going through the topic, choose the one you want to write about. Look closely at that particular story. Go through and find evidence in the story. Make you a list of key details and quotes that you're going to be able to use. And then organize your ideas well. Make yourself an outline if you need to. And go from there. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at some of the Zoom recordings where I discuss the stories and ideas. And hopefully this will help you in dealing with this. So the idea is that you want to make sure that you're understanding what you're looking at, how you're approaching it. And so hopefully everything is going to work for you in that way. Again, I'm looking forward to the essays. Note that it's due by before midnight on Monday, so you have a couple more days to be working on it and getting it organized. I'm going to stop this now and get this posted for you, and I'll send you a message that this video has been posted. And I'm looking forward to reading your essays.